Hey guys, it's Hannah and welcome back to the Dyslexic Reader, and today I'm going to be doing a sort of late August wrap up. I was away the last week of August, unplanned, sort of impromptu getaway, so I didn't have time to do this, but I'm doing it for you guys now. So the first half of the month I done a whole separate video which is my mid-month wrap up for August, which I'll link down below that you can go and check that out. So this is just what I have read in the second half of August, and the last couple of days I got into a bit of a slump. It's still sort of affecting me a little bit, but I actually got quite a lot read before that kicked in, so I'm quite pleased with what I achieved in August. The first book that I read in the second half of the month was The Censors Hand by A.M. Steiner. This was a book of NetGalley. If you go on to like my Goodreads or whatever, you'll see the full written review that I have done, but this is an adult fantasy, and for a debut novel I thought this was absolutely fantastic. I gave it 5 stars. The only criticism I would give it was I would like a little bit of, look how like shiny the sun is today. I would give a little bit more backstory on the characters and the world, especially for like such a high fantasy novel. I found myself struggling to get into it a little bit at the start, but that's just high fantasy, that's how it works. But a little bit of background might have been nice, but it was well written, the pace was good, the characters were good, and the concept was really interesting. And I'll definitely be waiting for the second one in the series to come out, because it is going to be a series. Which I'm super excited for. The second book I read was A Monster Cove by Patrick Ness. Now I got this from the library, so I had the illustrated edition, and I think that made all the difference. I think if I had read that story non-illustrated, it wouldn't have had the same impact with me. I personally gave it a 4 stars. I didn't think it was as good as sort of the hype portrays it, but I think that's partly because I found it hard to relate to the main character. I thought the story was good, and the ending was so profound and beautiful and totally realistic and important to anyone who has ever lost anyone important to them. I thought it was done absolutely beautiful and so realistic, but up until that point I thought the monster stories were a bit stupid and didn't really have a point, and I didn't connect with the main character because he wasn't grieving in the way that I personally cope with grief, so I didn't have that relatability there. But I thought it was a good story. I thought it was well done, but I think the illustrations had a lot to do with that, as I said. But I would definitely keep this in mind as a teacher for any situations that might arise for when we're talking about grief in class, or if a child loses someone or has someone in their close family with a terminal illness, to recommend this book. But just for me personally, I didn't relate an awful lot, so I didn't get as much out of it, but the ending was gorgeous. The next one I read was a sort of early teens, I don't want to say YA because it wasn't really, it was like 13, 14 year olds was sort of the target audience, and it was a murder mystery called Down the Rabbit Hole by Peter Abrams. I already have donated this book. I wasn't a fan of it. I thought the writing was sloppy in parts. I thought there was a lot of editing that was left undone. I think the book it was a 300 and something page book, it could have been like a 150 page book. Half of it could have been taught out. There was loads of side storylines that didn't go anywhere or connect to the main storyline, which I thought was pointless. I didn't connect with any of the characters, and the murder was obvious from as soon as the murderer was introduced into the storyline. It was like, well, it's clearly him. And it turned out to be there was no real twist at the end. It was slow in parts, and no, 2 stars. I didn't rate that at all. Then the next one was a reread for me. That was Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. I talk about this book a lot. It's easy in my top 3 books of all time. I think it's probably number 2. And I love this book, and if you like the movie The Secret of NIMH, which is the film adaptation, it's slightly different but pretty much very close to the original book. This is a fantastic book. It talks a lot about morality, what's right, what's wrong, civilization, humans' place in the world, and animal testing, and a lot of very important subjects, but it's done in a really light, fun way, and it's a really, really gripping read. Then the next book that I read was my non-fiction for the month. I try to do one non-fiction and one classic each month, and it was Assassination, A History of Political Murder by Lindsay Porter, and I give this a 3 stars. There was parts of it I thought were really, really interesting, and parts I thought were boring, and I personally just didn't, not that it was bad, but I just wasn't interested in those parts. So it went chapter by chapter through sort of high profile assassinations through history, starting with Julius Caesar and going right up to JFK. Now that's the parts that I found boring. Some of the figures I wasn't really interested in their assassination or that political time period, so it didn't really hold much interest to me, so I sort of skimmed those and read the ones I was interested in, and it was very well put together. There was photographs in it as well. They were good, high quality photographs. They made sense with the story. They were well placed and everything, which I thought was really good. And then the last 2 chapters looked at sort of what assassination and political murder looks like in today's society, and then sort of an open-ended discussion on whether it actually works and whether it can actually further or does it hinder sort of political movements. And that part of the book was really what pulled it up for me. If it had just been the murders history, it would have been like a 2 star, because ones I read were good, but there was nothing really new and exciting, and there was parts of it I wasn't interested in. But those last 2 pulled it up to a 3 star for me. Yeah, I thought it was good, and if that's yours, that's not really my normal sort of interest, and I enjoyed it. So if that is sort of your interest, then I would look into it, because it was well done. It was a well-made book. Then I got around to The Tales of Olga de Polga by Michael Baum. This was my 100th book of the year, and I done a whole novelty chats episode where it's mostly talking about this book, what it means to me, why I chose it, and sort of the 100th book milestone. So I'll link that down below and you can check that out as well. But yeah, it's not a great book. I'm not going to lie and say it is. It has a lot of emotional significance for me, but it is not a great book. It's a 3 star. It's an okay kids book. It was written by Michael Bond, who wrote the Paddington Bear series. I'm not a fan of his writing anyway, and it's nearly as if like each chapter is a short story about it. It's not nearly really an overarching sort of storyline, although you do have to read them in order because it references other characters and stuff. Which I don't really like. Like, if it's going to be separate stories, make it separate stories. And yeah, but it was like a basic sort of what you would read to a 6-year-old and they would kind of think it was okay. This is the book that I think possibly put me in that sort of reading slumpy mood, and that was Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard, which is absolutely beautiful cover. You can't really tell on the camera, but that is like, the blood's like raised. It's like 3D as if it's dripping down the book. It is a really gorgeous book, and I really enjoyed this. It's not my type of genre, and it's YA, which I don't normally read. A lot of my book is causing so much glare, it's unreal. That's what you get for having shiny notebooks. This is a book about a fantasy world where reds are normal humans with red blood, and then there's silvers who have silver blood and some degree of magical powers, and they are the ones who rule the country. But our main character is a red, but finds out she has powers even though she's not a silver. So the royal family sort of adopt her, and so that she's sort of hidden in plain sight. They tell everyone she is a silver and try to cover her up so that like the news doesn't get out, and it's about a political rebellion. I gave this book 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. It was a very visual book. Like, the descriptions I thought were very visual. I could really easily picture what I was reading, and I would be interested to see how this would be conveyed into a TV or movie adaptation, actually, because the settings were so vivid and the characters and the action scenes were so vivid. I didn't see the twists. Like, there's not only a twist at the end, there's different twists in the middle, and I saw very few of them coming, which in my opinion is good writing style. But the twists made sense. They were shocking, but they weren't like, this doesn't, why did you even put that in there? Like, for the shock factor, like, it did make sense to the storyline, but they were good twists. The only reason that I would sort of put it down was I felt like the political sort of rebellion regime that was going on, they were doing unlawful things, and sort of it came across a little in the book like they're doing unlawful things but they're doing it for the right reasons, and in my opinions right reasons don't counteract immoral deeds. I don't think a murder for a extremely good reason is okay, and I thought that was sort of glazed. Oh, it was sort of touched on but not really enough. The good guys were doing bad things and that was just sort of accepted, like, but they're still good even though they were doing these terrible atrocities because they were doing it for the right reasons. I don't necessarily think that's right, but I'll be interested to see where the rest of the story goes. You could leave it at this. It's not really a cliffhanger, but at the same time I'm really interested to see what happens to the characters. So I got this from the library and I'm going to see if the library has the next one or just wait for it to get the next one, put it on hold. So yeah, it was a good series and I hope that the issues I have with it are addressed in the next book. The final book I read in August was Rascoe and the Rats of NIMH. This is the sequel to Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH, but it's not written by the original author. It's written by his daughter, Jane Leslie Conley. They're about 20 years apart, you know, the date that they were written, and his daughter picked up the storyline, and I think this is a really solid sequel. It's a 4-star for me. It's not nowhere near as good a book as Mrs. Frisby. Mrs. Frisby tackles a lot of important issues in a, I'm not going to say childish way because that makes it seem as if they're not important, but through this a totally child appropriate story in a really approachable, understandable way approaches big issues. This doesn't do this. It's a really good book. It follows on so nicely from the storyline in the first one. You get a lot more backstory. It all fits perfectly. There's no clashes in the storyline. The ending's really emotional. It's just a really good book, but it doesn't tackle the same issues that the first one does, and that's why I don't love it as much and I only give it a 4-star. That is all the books that I managed to read in August. For September, I am hosting Sherlock September, where I'm going to try and read every Sherlock Holmes novel. We're on day 5 and I'm not far through. So I think we're on track. The latter part gets harder because they're not long singular stories per book. There are lots of little stories which I think will actually take me longer to read, because I feel like I'll have to read them separately. Like, I'll not be able to sit down and read 3. I'll have to read 1, go make a cup of tea, do something, come back and read another one. So I think that'll take longer, but even considering that, I think we're on track. I'm hosting Sherlock September. It is my idea and invention. If you want to partake in any sort of way, I'll leave the link to the video down below where I announce it and how you can take part and what it entails of and all that jazz. And yes, that is us. That is my wrap up for August. I hope you all had a really great reading month. I hope you're all happy. I hope you're all healthy, and I'll see you in my next video. Goodbye.